Well, good afternoon. Dr. Dodge here. You can see on the thing the little hassock we have, or whatever it is, the polished carburetor with his velocity stack. What I've got here is this right here is also die-cast. He's part, if you can tell from the little thing, and his little glass cover, he's a vintage strainer from 1970. You can see the little round disc that looks like it's a piece of plastic. That's actually the screen that was in this thing. So I disassembled it by first flipping it over, and the glass was stuck. I poured isopropyl alcohol. Let me see if I can get a better. But I use this stuff outside a lot. It has wintergreen oil. It cut the goo and all of that, but what was nice is that the wintergreen oil made you not gag from the smell of the rotten gasoline. So that thing was all packed full. I just used a little jeweler's screwdriver, dug it out into paper towels, and cleaned it all off. Managed to get it all disassembled. So on this end, we have the fuel shutoff. I've already polished that. I'm going to use the same technique that I used to polish this to polish this guy. So I'm going to use, I have a wore down stainless steel wire brush. I also have a new one for the Dremel tool. What I'm going to do is just slightly, barely touching with the rounded tip on the bottom of the Dremel tool, and slowly peel the gray away. You have to make sure that you don't get your metal end or your chuck onto your piece as you're leaning across it, because you'll mar your piece. I'm using a stainless steel brush because it's hard and we'll cut that stuff fairly fast, the die cast. You could use a brass brush, but it will sometimes leave a brass tinge to the die cast. You can use it, I wouldn't use a plastic brush because I've had more problems with the plastic brush leaving residue that is just as bad to get off. Now, luckily enough, this thing had no paint, but it's got patina on it, if you can tell, that would rival a original Sweet 16 car that's been sitting with no paint on it. So the polishing technique will work for restoring old Redline Hot Wheels and Matchboxes too. So anyway, without further ado, I'm gonna fire up the Dremel, and polish away, and I'll let you know, because we're gonna do one other thing here. This is the metal bail and all of that stuff for it. Before I start polishing, they're not paying me, so no, they don't get the free advertising. I'm gonna pour a gallon of vinegar in there, and I'm going to let that part soak, because the steel, it should clean up really nicely. Hopefully at the very end of the video, I'm actually going to copper plate the whole thing in a fairly simple way with a plating pen, a homemade one, and a AA battery. And that, with any luck, will keep the corrosion off. You'd be tempted to polish this up using your wire brush on here. If you do, never use it for anything soft, die cast, or brass again, because it'll have rust in it, and that rust will eventually find its way into the pores of your casting where you least want it to be, and then as soon as it gets wet, it'll leave streaky stains in it. So you always need to use your virgin brush for your nicest stuff, and then when it gets resorted to something like this, then that's the guy who would be doing the cleanup on this thing here. So there we go. I'm going to leave it at this and come back with the status on it in a little while. Stay tuned. Well, we're halfway there. That's one side. That's the other side. You can see the side on the right is only brushed enough to get all of the dirt and all of the muck off of it. Then you have, now you've actually well exposed the oxidized die-cast. Then you have to actually get through that, and you'll be able to tell once you, I tried to do the front and the back here split so you can see the difference when you actually get underneath it. It's hard to see, but you'll think it's polishing, and then suddenly you'll break that black loose and actually get to the metal underneath it. But you got to keep the brush moving all the time. Don't burn up your piece, because you'll leave brush marks and you'll never get that out of there. Anyways, status so far, that's about 20 minutes of polishing. So here we go. He's all polished with the wire brush. You can use the wire brush because it's harder than the die cast to somewhat shape it. So I use it to kind of round the edges and flat the flats a little bit better if you can. And then the next thing I'm going to do is come in and use buffing wheel on the Dremel tool and some Simchrome polish. And we'll see what it looks like. Just for reference. Here it goes. It already looks pretty. But it's still just dull and kind of grayish rather than chromy looking. So we'll see what it comes out like. Well, so now we have him, having gone over him with the buffer wheel, and now he's starting to look a little more chromy looking. But if you notice, there's, see if I can get it where I can point it out. The buffer wheel will not get down into these nooks right here because of the radius of the buffer wheel. So that's where we do this other trick. I'll show you guys later because I'm going to take a break from polishing for a while. But that's where we take some cotton and some of these skewers, we chuck it into the end, and we make our own mini tiny buffing wheel and get down inside of all of those areas. Well, final installment. After coming out of the vinegar, these things look just beautiful. They don't need any corrosion coating on them. Little knob there and his screws. I took, after I had polished it, I took the Q-tips and just started cleaning out all of the stuff the buffing didn't touch, and where all your buffing compound ends up, and just worked it all around. And quite honestly, it looks good enough that it doesn't need to use any sticks. But to show you what I'm talking about the sticks, is you just, see if I can do it here. Just start spinning a piece of wood and start dragging you off. So we've got a wad of Q-tip cotton on the end of it. I'm just going to put it right up against this thing, spin it around a little bit, and he forms his own little cone-shaped piece. You can use a little piece of that in the Dremel tool if you have crevices like this carburetor, where you have to get down into places. down into all of these nooks and crannies down into this. You go through it. You go through a ton of Q-tips and skewers. Now the large skewers don't fit. You have to use the smaller, cheap skewers, and the skewers hold up better than both a dowel and the toothpicks do. So that said, we have this guy. This assembly all goes into here. And we have our fuel bowl that'll go on there. And we have the assembly that goes on there. And it's all cleaned up and ready to, I need to make some gaskets for it, and it's going on the tractor. Thank you for watching if you watched this far. Have a good evening.